going to go over the AFC North. And going to start with the Pittsburgh Steelers. They won the division. Remember, they started off very good last year, won that was an 11-game win streak. Kind of fell apart at the end there, though. Went 12-4, won their division, lost to Cleveland in the wild card game, as we all remember. Cleveland had no coaching staff, and they were up 28-0 at the end of the first quarter. It was terrible, but they had a lot of turnover this season, so we'll go over that offseason. So we'll go over that now. Lost Bud Dupree. I mean, they did lose him last half season, but lost in free agency. Lost cornerback Steven Nelson and Mike Hilton. Also lost linebacker Avery Williamson, who they did traded for mid-year, and he never really did much for them, unfortunately. Lost longtime tackle Alejandro Villanueva. Also guard David DeCastro retired. Center Marquise Pouncey retired. Tackle Matt Filer, who we mentioned with the Chargers, signed with the Chargers, and then James Conner went to the Arizona Cardinals. And in terms of additions, brought in edge rusher Melvin Ingram. So we mentioned last episode. That's where Melvin Ingram went. So good signing opposite of TJ Watt. Traded for Joe Schobert recently too for the Jaguars for like a 6th or 7th round pick. Obviously draft wise, brought in Najee Harris first round, who's been looking good in the preseason. Second round pick tight end Pat Freiermuth, who is a very good blocking tight end. Last preseason game caught 2 touchdowns. Had some snaps with the first team. Maybe he can help with them. And then obviously also I mentioned this pick. I don't know much about him, but because of all the guys they lost offensive line, 3rd round they went with Kendrick Green at number 87. So, all right, John, you think this team can be in the conversation to win their division this year, and you think that they'll be better overall, or do you think that end of last season was kind of what we should expect from the Steelers?
I think the Steelers are a big candidate to regress pretty hard. I do not feel confident in their offensive line at all. And I know that Big Ben is always kind of been regarded as a guy who can kind of maneuver in the pocket, just make things happen, not really take sacks. But he's really old and he hasn't looked amazing the last few years. And I like his wide receivers a lot, but it's once again, it's the offensive line. It's Big Ben's age. I do like the addition of Najee Harris because I was never a big fan of James Conner. And so I think that Najee is definitely better than James Conner, but I think they're going to have to rely on him a lot more than most people realize. Just because once again, I just don't really believe in the offensive line and Big Ben at this age being able to do what he has done throughout most of his career. So I just don't really know where to put their offense in terms of the league. I feel like they could be good, but they could also be really bad if the offensive line just doesn't really work out, because as good as you can be at quarterback and running back and wide receivers and tight ends and all these things, we saw with the Kansas City Chiefs, if your offensive line can't perform, none of that matters. And they're in a division where there's a lot of good defensive linemen. And so it's going to be hard. And I don't know their full schedule off the top of my head, but I know there's a lot of good defensive linemen in the AFC, with the Broncos, with the Chargers, just some of these other teams that they're built to attack you in the trenches. And so it's going to be tough for the Steelers defensively too. I like adding Joe Schobert and Melvin Ingram, but I don't know if Joe Schobert has do we know the status on Devin Bush and him returning?
I'll look that up. I don't know, but
Okay.
I remember his injury was either really early, I think, so it's a chance he might be
Yeah,
back.
it was like week
I'll look
5.
into that right now.
Anyway, if Devin Bush does have to miss extended time, I don't know if Joe Schobert can really fully fill in for what he does. I mean, Robert Spillane sort of became the guy that really filled in, and that was just because, like you said, Avery Williamson didn't give him a whole lot. And so I think Joe Schobert's like a solid replacement, but we talk about it with like Ryan Shazier and Devin Bush, and they really like using very athletic linebackers in their scheme. Do you know when he's coming back yet?
So apparently he was a full participation as soon as training camp started a month ago. So looks like he's all systems go. I mean, there's no other reports saying that he might be held back. Like literally, there's like no reports after July. Like July was like, oh, he's fully ready to participate. So I'm assuming that means he's 100%, or healthy enough
Okay,
to play.
so I mean, that's a big positive. Like they really need that because, like we talked about, and like I said, they use their linebacker to be a guy who can cover a lot of the field. And so they need someone really athletic. And Joe Schobert, he's athletic, but he's not Devin Bush athletic. Steven Nelson, I was surprised they also let him walk. He was really crucial, I think, to their defense. He was, I can't remember. I think maybe it was like Pro Football Focus, like
He's
had him
always
graded
graded
as
like top
one of the
five,
best corners in the league. Yeah.
even though he's
Which I don't think
not
he's
top
like,
five.
that good, but also I think that just shows that he is very important to what they do. And also maybe just feels like Joe Hayden's been playing in the league forever. I don't know. How old is Joe Hayden? Like the guy's been
Probably
around for
like
a long
34,
time. And
35.
so,
I'll look that up now.
I mean, he's still doing good, but I just think that losing both him and Mike Hilton, I don't know who is slated to start opposite of Joe Hayden right now. But I do have
Joe's only
concerns with their
32.
secondary. Oh, okay. I mean, maybe it's just because we've watched his whole career. I don't know. Anyway, so there's that, and then losing Bud Dupree. I think Melvin Ingram's a really solid addition, but I think that Bud Dupree's athleticism and his speed and quickness and just pop on the other side of TJ Watt, I don't think that Melvin Ingram can necessarily provide that. I think he is a solid pass rusher, but even we saw with the Chargers opposite of Joey Bosa, he just wasn't able to produce the way that he had previously when he was in his prime. And so I could potentially see the defensive line take a bit of a hit there too. So it just feels like there's a lot of position groups to where I feel like they got worse. And also they're in a really hard division. Like I think the Browns got better, and we'll talk about them later. I think the Ravens, for the most part, got better. And I already thought the Ravens were better than them last year. I know there was like that 13 game stretch where the Steelers were undefeated. Right? It was 13. I don't know how many games they won in a row. 11. Okay. Well,
They ended the season 12-4.
yeah. Well, okay. But there was one of those games. I can't remember if it was in that undefeated stretch or maybe it was like the one game they won after, but where they played the Ravens and Lamar had COVID. So they played like RG3 and then like a few, like Ronnie Staley was hurt at that point. Like they just had a lot of missing players, and the Steelers were, for I think, like pretty much all fully there outside like Devin Bush was already hurt, and they beat him by like a field goal. It just felt like this latter half that we saw out of the Steelers. I don't know. I think that it's hard for me to envision that was just like a mental like crumbling of a team. It feels like maybe they just got brought back to reality, and I think we're going to be closer to that moving forward than we will be the 11 game win streak. But that being said, I don't think they're going to be terrible. They're not going to be like one of the worst teams in the league, but I don't think they make the playoffs personally.
I think it's important to factor into is that, remember, they didn't even have a bye week because, remember, the bye week got
That's
taken
true.
from them because of COVID, because of the Titans, and that was their big gripe. So I think that's a factor to play in. But, yeah, in regards to, I have similar concerns, especially cornerback. And like you already mentioned D-line, but cornerback too. I mean, it's already been a shaky spot for them. And usually, and maybe they can do this again this year, where they use their front seven with creative blitzes or coverages where it kind of eases the pressure off them. And granted, they still have Minka Fitzpatrick, who we all know is probably one of the best coverage safeties. I know, shout out to my friend Anik, who doesn't like him. But the other Trey Edmonds, he's been solid. I know he has been great, but I can hear Anik right now saying, no, he's terrible. So, yeah, and I think offensively is the biggest question mark, especially the run game. I mean, they've they've even said it, in training camp and reading articles and stuff where like they're gonna have an emphasis to run the ball, and I believe that because Mike Tomlin is an old school guy, defensive coach. He's gonna want to run the ball, and I think it will help their offense too in regards to taking the deep shots that they stop taking as the year goes on. But like. Yeah, I'm with you. I wouldn't be shocked if this is the third team in the division. Like, I'm just not a lot of talent on the offensive line. Maybe their guard works out. Maybe, like we mentioned before, maybe they have guys come up the ranks. And maybe because they will run the ball more, it will help their offensive line be better because they were just so pass heavy as the season went on. But regardless, yeah, I'm not too confident this team will win the division again. But we'll see. We'll have to see. Maybe Ben just needed because remember he was coming off that elbow surgery last year, so maybe that affected him, and he says he feels a little bit better this year. So year 2 of Chase Claypool, hopefully they don't kill him because they're already. It seems like they try to find ways just to slow him down. With he only had. I remember quick Claypool rant. I think he had 40% snap count last year, and even Mike Tomlin was like, yeah, we don't want him to hit the rookie wall. So it's like, okay, so you make him hit the rookie wall by not playing him. It was just really weird. I mean, I guess this just goes to the fact they don't really trust their rookies sometimes. So, but regardless, that is the Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll have to see if all these internal changes will work out for them, and see if they can still be in the hunt this year. But going on to the other team, one of the other teams that we mentioned in this division, Baltimore Ravens. 11-5 last year. They got over the hump, beat the Tennessee Titans, but unfortunately lost to the Buffalo Bills in the divisional round. They also, I think they always seem to have a lot of turnover in terms of personnel. So lost Matt Judon, Yannick Ngakoue, wide receiver Willie Snead, also center Matt Skura, traded away Orlando Brown, as we all know, to Kansas City. Lost RG3 quarterback. I think RG3 is now going to be working with ESPN, so good for him. Also, Mark Ingram also left to Houston. Had a lot of additions. Brought in tackle Juwan James after the Broncos released him, but probably not going to play this season, so kind of don't worry about that name. Brought in Kevin Zeitler, who was surprise cut by the Giants. Alejandro Villanueva, former Steeler, they brought him into. Brought in Sammy Watkins, Justin Houston, and then in terms of the draft, grabbed Rashad Bateman in the first round at 27, and then a guy I'm pretty sure we both liked, edge rusher Odafe Owe, aka I think it was Jason, but now he's going by his birth name, so we all have to say it. Got him at 31, and then also added a guard themselves in the third round in Ben Cleveland. Don't know much about him, but once again, Baltimore, one of those teams that usually knows how to draft offensive linemen, as we've seen. But all right, John, throwing it to you. Do you think that they can get the AFC North crown back, and you think this offense can take the next step with Lamar?
This is a division where I don't feel super confident predicting a winner right now. I think it's between them and the Browns. But I think the Ravens got better. I really liked the offensive lineman they brought in. It did suck that Orlando Brown did not want to play right tackle. He wanted to be a left tackle because obviously having him on the right tackle spot was just awesome for them. But I think Alejandro Villanueva is a fantastic replacement. He's a veteran. He's a lot older, so it does suck long term. But I think in the short term, he's a really good replacement. I thought bringing Kevin Zeitler was awesome. I think he's a really solid guard. He has been ever since Cleveland, and obviously with the Giants, he was solid too. So I like that addition. But I and also once again with Owe, the defensive end they drafted, he's just an athletic monster, and so I can only imagine what kind of schemes they can draw up, including him. And I think he's going to obviously fill in some of the missed snaps that we're going to see after they lost Yannick Ngakoue. So will Justin Houston. But overall, the one thing I think overall disappointed by in their offseason was the way they addressed the wide receiver spot. Wasn't the biggest fan of Rashad Bateman. Maybe he proves us wrong, but I just really haven't heard anything about him in camp. I feel like a lot of the other rookie receivers, I've heard, stuff about them popping. One guy that I think I had them taking in my mock drafts was Terrace Marshall Jr., and I've just heard nothing but positive things from him with the Panthers training camp. I think he scored a touchdown in every single preseason game so far, including right now they're playing the Steelers, and he already has a touchdown. So I thought they should have taken him. He just feels like, a deep threat guy, really big. I thought it was obvious to me. What were you going to say?
No, I'm just pulling up our mock because, I felt the same way, but it's your turn. Go ahead.
Yeah, anyway. So I think also Hollywood Brown should potentially have a breakout year, quote unquote, that we've been sort of expecting. We've sort of really been hoping that he would become what he was drafted for. And I think this might be the first year that he could truly do that, just because they did add Sammy Watkins, who I don't think Sammy Watkins is going to revolutionize their offense or anything. I don't think that he's amazing at this point in his career, but he's an upgrade from what they had. And then also, like we said, Rashad Bateman, who once I'm not as high on him as I was other receivers, but I still think he's good, and still think I'm glad that they addressed it. So I think that this could be an up year for Hollywood Brown. Uh, Mark Andrews didn't have the best season last year, but I think he should be a bounce back candidate. We know that Lamar loves him. And also, I think that J.K. Dobbins could have a really solid year. I think he was one of like 5 total running backs ever to finish a season where he was averaging over 6 yards a carry. Obviously, it was on a very low volume, but that's still an impressive feat, regardless, because yeah, I mean that just shows that he's efficient with the carries he did get last year, and so I think he's due for an increased workload. For any of you fantasy managers out there, though, still beware. He's got a running quarterback, and Lamar is always going to be RB1 in Baltimore, so don't get that twisted.
And they just
But J.K.
signed Gus Edwards.
Gus Edwards, yeah. So I wouldn't. I wouldn't be over here, thinking that J.K. Dobbins is going to blow up for you. But I think in real life terms, I think he should help them improve overall. I think also he could have an increased role in the passing game. The Ravens, actually, I think both of the last 2 years have ranked dead last in throwing to their running backs. And I don't know, maybe that's just the scheme that they run. Maybe it's because Lamar would rather take off than dump it off to the guy in the flat. But they preach it every year that they're going to increase the running backs receptions. But I think maybe this could be the year that they finally do it, because it's been a few years of Lamar, and now we're kind of seeing like, okay, like Lamar, you just running, it's not good enough to get us to a Super Bowl. So now we got to come up with new creative ways to get other guys involved with you throwing. And I think Lamar's a very capable passer. He's not a bad passer. I know some people, the narrative around him is that he's not a good passer. He is a good passer. There are certain limitations, like he's not Aaron Rodgers, he's not Patrick Mahomes, but he's not as bad as a lot of people would have you believe. So yeah. And I think they did upgrade their receiver spot overall. So I think we could see a better Ravens team than we did last year. So yeah, it's either them or the Browns who win the division. I think the Browns have the higher potential, but don't sleep on the Ravens.
Yeah. So in regards, I'm gonna start with that because I think that's where I put more of the blame on that on Greg Roman, why their passing game hasn't evolved, because we saw it in San Francisco. I mean, yeah, and with that offense of Colin Kaepernick, it just once teams started, it's like we mentioned with Seattle, but this was like more of a long-term thing. Once teams started figuring out Greg Roman's passing offense, which wasn't that complicated, he didn't keep innovating, and once they figured out the pass game, then the run game became much harder. Then the whole offense kind of went downhill. And I'm with you. I think people forget Lamar ran a pro-style offense at Louisville. Yeah, he took it, had a few quarterback run designs, and also, some of his highlights are just him scrambling and running. But he ran pro-style at Louisville, so it's not out of his game to do that. It's just that the Ravens haven't asked him to do that. And yeah, I wasn't a big fan of the Rashad Bateman pick. I actually, in my mock draft, had Kadarius Toney going to them, but still a bigger wide receiver, a more prototypical size number 1 wide receiver. Because I wasn't impressed with Bateman coming out, and especially if he hasn't been popping in camp, like that's a little worrying. I mean,
I don't know if he's not. I just haven't heard anything about him.
It is the Ravens. Like, they got a lot of good corners, so like he just may be having a tough time against those guys, which a lot of people do, especially if you're a rookie. But yeah, and then I mean, I like their offseason additions, but other than that, I mean, I like readdress the offensive line. Sammy Watkins is a solid signing if he can stay healthy, but I don't think we expect him to do so. So I think this is really I think they're kind of just banking on, Hollywood Brown started kind of coming on at the end of this last season. They Greg Roman started finding ways to get him the ball in his hands. We mentioned came in the league as a speedster. We saw what he did week 1 against Miami a couple of years ago, where he exploded for like 3 touchdowns, like 100+ yards. So they can do that. It's just, can they be consistent? Can they keep innovating that pass offense, building off the run, which once again, like, teams are already so scared of Lamar in the run game. It shouldn't be too complicated just to have a few more wrinkles. So we'll see. But yeah, I love Odafe Adowe just because, I mean, it's just freaking Ravens, man. Just great pick. Him opposite of Justin Houston, he's going to learn. If anything, he was a little raw coming out. Had all the physical tools, just needs to polish up, utilizing them and technique and such, and no better teacher than the Ravens and Justin Houston alongside. And also has Patrick Queen still, so I still expect this defense to be really good. Like John mentioned too, I expect this team to really be right in the playoff hunt, and definitely in conversation for winning this division. So next year they get Juwan James back at tackle, so this team could be really good. They got a lot of decisions to make though. Got to re-sign Lamar. I think coming up soon, in a couple of years. So they already have been having issues with the contract. So we'll see how that goes for them. But going on to the other team in the division, it's the Cleveland Browns, no longer a joke. Made the playoffs last year, beat Pittsburgh in round 1, and almost beat Kansas City and Chad Henne, but unfortunately they didn't. In terms of losses, lost defensive lineman Sheldon Richardson, defensive tackle Larry Ogunjobi, edge guy Olivier Vernon, and safety Carl Joseph. I believe Olivier Vernon, I think he tore his Achilles or something, I believe, so that's why they let him go. I'm not 100% sure on that. Additions, though, brought in Jadeveon Clowney, Tack McKinley, defensive lineman Malik Jackson. I think that was an underrated signing. Cornerback Troy Hill from the Rams also brought in. I think we both like the signing. Safety John Johnson to help anchor that defense. And then draft-wise, it seems like they do it every draft, and hopefully they start hitting. Cornerback Greg Newsome in the first round at 26, and then a linebacker who I really wanted and loved, Jeremiah Wosu-Koromoa at 52, who I think I mentioned last podcast. He has been popping in the preseason as well. So, John, this year, Cleveland, they took the step. They won the playoffs last year. Can they win the division this year? And, can they finally be taken seriously, I guess? Or is it a fluke last year?
I think they should be taken seriously. I think anybody who's sleeping on the Cleveland Browns is a fool. I think that the Browns are, just to put it plainly, they have one of the best rosters in the entire league, just across the board. I really like the Jadeveon Clowney signing because it's a really low risk deal, but it's potentially a really high reward, putting him opposite of Myles Garrett. He's obviously very versatile. We've seen him play linebacker. We've seen him play edge rusher. I've heard talks that he's beefed up a little bit, so maybe they can even throw him inside a little bit. We know they did that with Myles Garrett a lot last year. So I think that just gives them another versatile piece to use. Obviously, Tack McKinley, another guy just like that, very versatile. Maybe if they do throw one of those guys on the inside for some of those snaps, you can throw Tack on the outside then. I really like John Johnson. That was a really solid, underrated signing. He's been one of the more underrated safeties in the league for a long time. Very solid, very consistent for the Rams. And so I think he just provides them, that stability on the back end. Denzel Ward's a beast at corner. Like you said, they draft a lot of corners, over and over and over. So, Justin Gilbert, he didn't work out. Denzel Ward has. Greedy Williams, we don't really know what he is yet. Now Greg Newsome. But overall, they have a lot of talent at corner. It's just, can the guys behind Denzel Ward put it together and live up to the potential that we think they can. And then we thought that they needed to address offensive line or D tackle, or sorry, not offensive line, linebacker or D tackle. And they went out, they got the guy that we both really liked, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. He's a beast. Still don't really know why he dropped. I think there was that health issue.
Heart condition that worried teams, and like his size. They're worried because he's like 230, like 220. He's pretty kind of size for a linebacker. But then I think once they saw him, like, dude, this dude's like pure muscle.
Yeah. So, I like that addition. I really like what they added. I didn't think they lost a ton. They lost Carl Joseph, but they upgraded with John Johnson. They lost Olivier Vernon, but I think they upgraded with Jadeveon Clowney. They lost the 2 D-line guys, and they didn't really fully address that a ton. But Malik Jackson, he's solid. He can give you a replacement. And I think they have some young guys.
They probably do. Again, it's tough. Like interior defensive lineman, offensive lineman. Like, it's just a lot of teams just bring guys up from their own, system. So.
Yeah, like the interior line is one of those spots that, like, tons of teams draft like 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th round guys, and you have them for a few years, and then they sort of start to come into your team a few years later. It's never really one of those positions where guys just instantly pop. I know they got my guy Andrew Billings from Baylor. He was a 20-year-old when he got drafted. I think he's projected to be a starter along the defensive line. He's pretty decent. He's not amazing, but he's decent. So yeah, overall, the Browns have a really talented roster. I think if I'm still not overly impressed with Baker. I think if they really wanted to get serious, I even put them on our post of like, if Aaron Rodgers was to be traded, I think the Browns need to make a call instantly. Because if you add Aaron Rodgers to that team, I think they probably become the favorite to win the AFC, in my opinion. That's how talented overall I think this roster is, which I know it's crazy because the Chiefs still exist, but they just have a lot of talent across the board. And that's, we didn't even mention, the two workhorses, Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb and Kevin Stefanski and what he, brings, and
really
the offensive line. Yeah. Who might be the best in the entire league. Yeah. So they're just a very talented team. Well, I think overall they can go as far as Baker will take them. And I think just with the talent they have, they can make it pretty far. They should make a playoff run. I think they can win this division. Not going to say 100% they will, because I think the Ravens are still very good. But overall, I think they're one of those teams that maybe they could make it to the AFC Championship game. But if they get to that point and it's the Chiefs, I don't think they're better than Kansas City yet. I still think that Andy Reid's the superior coach, Patrick Mahomes, everything they have. But I think their peak right now to me could be like what Buffalo did last year. Yeah. And that's with, obviously, I think they have a much better roster than Buffalo, but they don't have Josh Allen. So Josh Allen, the quarterback difference is what evens it out to me.
Yeah, and I think just the Buffalo, I know their defense wasn't that great last year, but they're more of a creative, game plan specific defense, as opposed to, this is just, as opposed to Cleveland. Going to play Seattle cover 3 for the most part. This is what we do. Doesn't matter what you do. This is what we're going to do. But yeah, like John mentioned, I mean, I love the additions on their defense. Clowney, Takk McKinley. I know Clowney's been in and out, but regardless, you got Takk McKinley as a good backup / rotational guy. They still have Myles Garrett, so those guys aren't to be asked to do too much, I feel. And then, I'm worried a little bit about their size defensive in terms of their interior D-line, but like we just mentioned, maybe they have a guy or two coming up that, could be more of their run stuffer. Regardless, I think Malik Jackson, especially on passing downs, can play defensive tackle. He can also kick to edge, defensive end, if an injury like to Clowney does come up. But yeah, in terms of their offense, I mean, I obviously think that they should be better. Now that they have a 1 year under this Stephen Stefanski system, get Odell back, integrate him into, get him used to the system too, because it seemed like him and Baker were not on the same page, on top of the fact that, they were all adjusting to the new system last year. So, yeah, I mean, this team, I'm with John. This team should be a playoff contender, a serious contender, considering their roster talent. I think, if they can manage the game just enough so that it's not all on Baker's shoulders. And especially if their defense can take the next step, I think they can be a real contender. But once again, nothing's a guarantee. These are all ifs. And, and Baker's been inconsistent. Let's just be honest. He had good rookie year, not a good sophomore year. Good, year last year was his third year. Had a good year last year. Let's see if he can, be consistent, which is, one of the things that's, it sounds easy, but it's what really makes, the elite or the good elite players in general, that's what makes them elite, is that they're consistent. So we'll see if Baker can take that step and be consistent, because he like Lamar is also in contract talks with the Browns. So that is the Cleveland Browns. Moving on to the team, the last team in the division, last team of the night. Cincinnati Bengals went 4-11-1 last year. Here are the losses. AJ Green finally left. John Ross, former first-round pick, also left. Giovanni Bernard, left as well. Center B.J. Finney, like I mentioned, went to Pittsburgh. Lost cornerback William Jackson III, very good underrated corner. Edge rusher Carl Lawson, who actually tore his Achilles the other day, so unfortunate for him. And then also defensive lineman Geno Atkins. Green Bay, please sign him. He's still out there. Lost him as well. Added on, though, tackle Riley Reif, who we mentioned, from the Vikings. Safety Ricardo Allen. Cornerback Mike Hilton. Former Dallas guy Chidobe Awuzie also added him. Larry Ogunjobi. signed Trey Hendrickson from the Saints to a good contract after he had a good year. And then draft-wise, got Jamar Chase, who seems to be having some issues in camp. And then also second round, addressed offensive line again with Jackson Carman, who I thought was pretty solid, and could be kind of a steal there. So all right, John, it's Joe Burrow still unsure about that ACL. He still doesn't seem to be 100%. Jamar Chase is struggling, and then obviously Zach Taylor is on the hot seat. What do you expect out of the Bengals this year?
I think they could improve, but it's just a really hard division. I still think they're going to be the worst team in the division. They lack just a lot of depth across the board. They signed my guy Chidobe Awuzie, and that kind of sucked to see him leave the Cowboys. And I feel like they kind of overpaid for him. I think he's a solid cornerback, but not a number one. And he kind of got paid like it. So anyway, just overall, I don't think losing any of the guys that they did really hurt them because a lot of those guys are sort of older. Giovanni Bernard, been there for a long time. John Ross never really turned into anything. AJ Green, been there for a long time, older guy. Geno Atkins, same thing. Except for maybe William Jackson. I think that one probably hurt him a little bit. But overall, it was pay him or he's going to walk, and they didn't want to pay him. Yeah. I was surprised when they paid Chidobe as much as they did because it just felt like, okay, you could probably just keep William Jackson.
Yeah.
But if I'm thinking correctly, I think they did technically get Chidobe Awuzie for cheaper than William Jackson was. So anyway, the additions they had, Trey Hendrickson, I feel like was overpaid too.
Yeah.
He did have a solid year sack wise last year, but I'm always wary of. Yeah, I'm also just wary of those guys who put up big sack numbers across from an elite pass rusher. Obviously, Cameron Jordan's on the other side of that defensive line, and he's just been doing it for so long that we know how good he is. And we saw it with the Chicago Bears, right? Like for the Dallas Cowboys, they had Robert Quinn. He was opposite of DeMarcus Lawrence. DeMarcus Lawrence 2 years ago did not have the best sack numbers, but his pass rush win rate, all these kind of things were top 10. So he was still performing at an elite level, just wasn't finishing. Meanwhile, on the other end, Robert Quinn, I think, had 12 and a half, 13 and a half sacks.
Digits, I remember.
It was in the double digits. I think it was 13 and a half, which is a lot, right? And so people think, wow, that's his second best sack total since the year that he had 20, I think it was. And he led the league when he was on the Rams. So people thought that, man, he's bounced back and he got a big contract from the Bears. And last year he didn't do as well. And so I think that Trey Hendrickson could be one of those guys. Now he's a lot younger than Robert Quinn, so maybe this was sort of him finally getting used to the NFL. But yeah, overall, like you said, I don't think he's an amazing run defender, and I am wary of the guys who put up the big sag numbers and then get paid for it because I said this when we talked about our defensive line rankings. I think sacks it's just a really overrated stat. Because I think somebody else could create the disruption, but you might be the guy who finishes it. You're the one who's going to get the credit for it, which I just think it's dumb. Because fans, they just look at sack numbers when in reality, like Aaron Donald, how many times has he even led the league in sacks? But we all know that Aaron Donald is the best, right? So anyway, yeah, overall, I don't know. The Bengals are the Bengals. They didn't have a terrible offseason. I don't like when young teams like that who are trying to rebuild do overpay for certain guys like they did. But you can't complain. They had tons of cap space to spend. So we'll see how it works out for them. They're still a few years away from really competing, especially with how talented this division is. I mean, you know how high I was on Jamar Chase, but I still think that it was a mistake to not take Penei Sewell, just because of the state of that offensive line, Joe Burrow, how he got hurt. And also, I think T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd are really good. And I think Jamar Chase is solid too. But I was even pissed when my Cowboys did it and they took CeeDee Lamb. And I know that was a little different because it was best available, right? They're at 18. And all of a sudden, this guy who looked like a top 10 guy gets, all the way there. And you had so many spots that you could take that you go there. I didn't feel like the Bengals were in a best available kind of position. It felt like they had a massive need on the offensive line. There was a guy who looks like he's going to be the next great offensive lineman in the draft. They pass on him and they get a receiver who they're already really, really good at. So we'll see how it works out long term. Maybe Joe Burrow was an influencing factor in that decision because we know they played in college. But if Jackson Carman can become a solid lineman, maybe Riley Reeve helps shore up the offensive line issues, then maybe we'll look back and say that they made the right move. But yeah, I think they should take Penei Sewell, especially since not sold on Jonah Williams as of yet. I don't know much about Jackson Carman, Riley Reef. We know what he is. So yeah, I still think the offensive line is going to be a struggle for them, and they're going to be playing from behind quite a bit this year. So might marginally improve, but not a ton.
Yeah, I'm really worried. I've heard Pro Football talk about this, and they make good points. I'm really worried about Joe Burrow because he doesn't seem to be 100. ACL game. He's not 100% back. With the ACL, it seems like, and I think it's more mentally than physically. And there's conflicting timelines. Joe Burrow's only coming into his second year, might be thrown to the wolves, and then Zach Taylor on the other hand, he's kind of on the hot seat. So I feel like there's a little bit of pressure from him on his team, even though it's still a relatively young-ish team, a lot of moving parts. Like I mentioned, they just lost a bunch of key pieces that have been there for years, and brought in a bunch of guys. So. I hope for Jamar Chase, and I expect him to figure it out. Get right again. Like we mentioned, we were messaging. You made the good point. He didn't play college football last year, even too. So it's no matter how much you work out, it's just nothing's really going to prepare you for the NFL. For football, tackle football, unless you're playing tackle football. So it may take him a few weeks, but like I said, just something to watch for Joe Burrow. Watch him. Yeah, I feel like because one of his biggest attributes too was how he's not a guy that's going to tuck and run, but he was like the Drew Brees, is like the Tom Brady's, where he knew how to manipulate the pocket, slide, just step away just enough from pressure to make the throw and such. And I'm worried that with coming off the ACL, that he may not be as confident, or maybe as confident in doing so, and maybe he looks down, at the line more now, and instead of looking downfield, he's going to miss targets. So regardless, though, yeah, I don't expect this Bengal team to be great. I wouldn't be surprised if they're 4-13, worse than last year's record, and Zach Taylor's gone. So, but maybe with more of these pieces they added for the offensive line, they can get Joe Mixon going, and then maybe that'll open up his offense because he is from the Sean McVay coaching tree, and who is from Kyle Shanahan, which strong emphasis on the run game first, and then build your pass game off that. So, excuse me. So we'll see how the Bengals do, but like I said, we all don't expect much from them, even though they got their fancy new jerseys. But yeah, that will end. That's going to wrap up this episode. That was the AFC and NFC North, and the wide receiver / running back rankings. Did a lot. Not going to do an episode like this for a while. Next time, from here on out, we're just going to do one at a time. I think next week we will be doing AFC East first. Next week, early, mid next week, and then next weekend we will be doing NFC East and then our season predictions. So as the season gets closer, we're getting right there, wrapping this all up. We almost have everything done. So once again, thank you everyone for your support, whether it be on the rankings, just the post in general. John's McKinnon on Instagram, like I mentioned, now we're over 2,000 followers, which I think only a month ago we were like at 1,000. So it's climbing fast. We're going to try to get those numbers also elsewhere. If you're watching on YouTube, wherever you're just watching or listening, like I mentioned every time, like, comment, subscribe, leave, and just give us a shout, give us a follow. Instagram's up there. TikTok's over there. TikTok handles same thing as the Twitter handle, and we have a Facebook page, Shut Up and Ball. So that's going to wrap it up for us tonight. Hope everyone enjoys the last weekend of preseason. Good luck in your fantasy drafts, and just have a nice weekend, everybody.